to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath. You can't see my words, founder of the podcast and Thrive Meetings and Events. And to my left here, whatever, is Aurora Dawn Benton. She is the founder and chief change agent of Astrapto. Did I say that right? Astrapto. I know I've said it before, which means to illuminate, and her mission is to shed light on social and environmental issues in hospitality, travel, and events. And to Aurora's left is Molly Crouch. There you go. Who is the corporate director of sustainability at Sodexo Live. And just based on this, you know we're going to have fun. We are here to talk about how to embed sustainability into the event planning process. And that is, I don't like us that way. I like us this way. It's really kind of hard. And Aurora and Molly, I mean, the three of us have been working on this like tangentially, for a couple of years now. And Aurora, I met you up in Baltimore. Molly, that was actually one of your venues, was the Baltimore Convention Center at the time. But it really is, how do you embed it? I mean, sustainability, all right, that's a big open question. But sustainability has been around for a while. So how do we do it in little pieces so it's not so daunting?
Ooh, little pieces. Molly, you want to take the first?
How do we do it in little pieces? I think honestly, it's recognizing that it is something that needs to be put inside everything that you do. So many people are sustainable at home, right? They go out of their way to make sure they're recycling their batteries and their light bulbs and their electronic waste and making sure they're splitting their trash up. And then they come to work and it's like being on vacation, I suppose. All those things kind of tend to go away. They don't think to apply what you're doing at home to bring it to work. And so I think some of it is just rethinking what we're doing in general. And that, just because I'm sustainable at home doesn't mean that I can't be sustainable at work. And just because maybe my work is the most sustainable doesn't mean that my clients coming in aren't concerned about being sustainable. And so I think for me personally, it's just introducing the idea that it's not a foreign concept. It's not your home life versus your work life. It's all one piece. So I don't know. How do you feel about it, Aurora?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that little changes add up, right? So it's easy to think like, oh, there's this little thing, right? Because you asked about it being broken down into smaller pieces. And I think sometimes it's easy to think of sustainability as like, you have to have this like transformational, life-changing, lightning moment and all will be different, But sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, sustainability is making little changes that add up, right? So it's, if you're doing a big plated event and you have preset water and preset bread and preset butter and preset dessert, it's looking at that and saying like, well, how many pieces of bread is reasonable? How big of a slice of cake should that be? Can we get, 20 slices out of the cake instead of 15 or whatever, whatever the case may be. And just realizing that when you multiply that by 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, event after event, it really does add up. So I think if you want small things to matter in sustainability, my advice would be to write them down, whether it's a piece of paper on a wall where you're just doing like tick marks or whether it's weighing something, whatever that looks like. If you start to measure those small things after a month, 6 months, a year, you have some pretty impressive numbers.
Well, and that reminds me of a picture I posted. Actually, I used it in my presentation last week or 2 weeks ago at SGMP, is the picture that you and I took of the table when we were in Savannah.
Yep, I use that a lot.
And it had leftover cake, it had leftover iced tea, and the dressing to me is not that big of a deal, right? But I mean, how could you do that differently? But so many pieces of cake.
I'm like, could you make smaller slices? Right. And that would have.
Yeah, because almost everyone, that was after we finished eating, and almost every piece of, so you have like a piece of cake like this, and it was like everybody had just eaten the little triangle at the end, and there was like the big chunks of cake. Almost everyone had done the same thing. So a lot of wasted cake in that instance.
Right. And then that wasn't even counting the 3 or 4 tables that were preset with the water and the iced tea and the salads that nobody sat at.
Yeah.
And that's just rethinking that kind of things.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that was part of the gist behind this presentation that Molly and I did a couple of months ago at CaterSource, and that we'll be doing again at the upcoming NACE educational event in Orlando later this month. The whole idea that like, it's easy to think all or nothing. It's easy to just think like, oh, it's got to be 100% preset. And people just, it seems like such a simple thing to say like, well, couldn't we rope off 80% of the tables at the back of the room? But boy, is that a hard decision to sell, right? Like there's a lot of elements in that. And I think Molly can speak to it better than I can because she's lived those conversations. But just really, I think it's about, when we talk about rethink, it's about having an open mind, and it's about being willing to say yes where you normally say no, and being willing to say no where you normally say yes. So for example, if you're a supplier, if you're a caterer or a hotel, and a client comes and says, oh, we need to add this, we need to do 100% that. And you're just like, especially if you're the salesperson or the client services person, you're like, got it, right? You asked for it, you're the client. That's a yes, because we always say yes to clients, of course. And so what does it look like to stop and say, can we talk about what you've just asked for? Like, can you tell me why you've asked for this? So being willing to say no, but in a way that's sort of consultative and negotiating, but then also being willing to say yes to things that like, oh, can we put the salad dressing in a different vessel? No. Why? Well, because we've always put it in this vessel. Can we rethink that? Right. So I think that's where we're coming from with this idea of kind of taking a beat and rethinking what your decisions are.
So Molly, talk about those preset tables. I mean, because it is kind of an industry standard that we preset everything. And I think maybe in a little bit of this coming out of COVID, we're still coming back with lack of staffing. That might be something that we automatically think that we should do.
I think so, from my experience, and again, I was a director of banquets prior to being the sustainability person that I am now. And so I had that question quite a bit, and I'd see it on paperwork quite a bit. And before pre-pandemic, staffing wasn't as big of a deal. And, if that's what they want, that's what they want. And usually I work in a convention center, so it wasn't just a one-time event. There was 2 or 3 days of events. And so you kind of chose which event you would talk to the client about specifically. Hey, maybe this is one we could do. It's lunchtime. There's other lunches going on. There's other events going on. There's other clients sponsoring other things amongst your clientele that may want to go somewhere else. And I think some of the fear that I always got back from the clients was the room's going to look empty. The room's going to look like nobody wanted to come. They're going to look like it was a waste of time. They're going to walk in the back of the room, see a bunch of empty tables, and they're going to walk away. And I think that was the general fear of the client. And so, fast forward to now where sustainability is more important. It's more intertwined in everybody's events and everybody's thinking. It's not such a foreign concept to bring up. So I think from the operator side, we just need to know that the client is going to be willing to have those conversations, because a lot of times they aren't willing, and they feel like you're trying to, I don't know, get something off on them, or you know what I mean? Like try to, save food because you're not going to put it out. And it's like, no, you've paid for the food. We didn't buy the food for anybody else but you. You've paid for the food as your food. The food is here. We have the ability to have the service staff be able to service you, because what's already been preset allows the servers that are out there to have a little bit more extra time. So I don't really need to fully staff the back part of the room, because I've already got servers that are going to be available because they've already preset the front half of the room. And so I think just having the conversation, but a lot of times they don't want to hear it, because they think about it from the speaker's perspective as well. And the speaker's going to be staying on stage and a half full audience, and they're going to go, gosh, I don't know if I want to speak here again. I thought it would be a sold out room. There's just a lot of things that the communication from us to them is one thing, but from them to their client, to their end client, is the whole another piece. And I think that's some of the things that we've been trying to talk about. Aurora and I have been trying to talk about, not only from the sales side of them coming to a convention center, or a special event facility, whatever it is, and talking to them then, but having that notion for them to be able to go back, because by the time they get on site, there's not a lot of chance for them to go back and say, hey, we were thinking about making a small change. Even though it sounds like it's a small change, it's how it's communicated. And so if somebody's not familiar and doesn't have the right words to say it, it could be a disaster all the way around. So I see it both sides. I want it to change. And I feel like staffing and labor is something that can help it get there. But we've got to give them the right tools and the right words and the right phrases to make it sound like a positive thing, not like we're trying to take something away.
Exactly.
Well, and I think that brings up too, is like, okay, let's rethink the room, or knowing your numbers, right? Knowing your history. And, you say you've got 900 people registered, right? Do you really know that 900 people show up to your event, right? And depending on where you are, I mean, Orange County Convention Center, which is where you used to work, right, you've got a lot of walking things to go, a lot of restaurants to walk to, especially if that dinner is not mandatory. Right. And or if you were in Vegas or whatever, but you have to know your numbers. And maybe you put the entryway not in the back of the room, or you put the unpreset tables on the sides, right? Because ideally you want everybody in the front of the room, not in the back.
Yes. Yeah. But again, from a guest perspective, they want to get in the back of the room, eat the meal, and then sneak out so they can go catch another session or be early to the session that they wanted to see, or go back down on the show floor for that 10 or 15 minutes. So there's a lot of different reasons why that happens in a convention center environment. In a special event facility where you're doing like a wedding, for instance, is a different story. And, most people have already sent in cards, but then you get a lot of no-show still at that point. So what do you do with a no-show? And so I think those conversations of what to do with a no-show is really so that you've already had that conversation, so that when it comes down to it and they come on site and they go, you know what, I think we're going to have a lot of no-show. Because, very rarely do people put out, unless it's an extra charged event, very rarely is it part of a registration that says, I'm going to come to the dinner, if the dinner's included within the package. If it's a separate buy-on, then yeah, absolutely. People have bought on for $160 for the dinner. They're pretty much probably going to come. But the ones that, are just lunch on the show floor, that's a totally wide open anything. Could be anything. I'm going to an event. Actually, I'm going to IAVM, and I was just looking up to figure out if I needed to buy the full, 4-day package deal at way too much money. And I shouldn't say that because there's probably somebody from IAVM listening. Or should I buy a day event, right? And I realized I'm really only going to be there for the day. But the day that I'm buying is lunch on the show floor. So what does that mean to me as the attendee? And I'm a catering person. I'm pretty sure it means subcontractor carts out on the show floor, and I'll just go up and buy whatever I want to buy on my own dime. So it doesn't mean I'm going to get a free lunch on the show floor, even though it says lunch on the show floor. So again, it's how communicated, and then what is the end result? All you had to do is do a rollover eye of information. I would have rolled over and went, oh, okay, it's cash and carry.
Exactly.
Maybe I can make plans with somebody else. I've got Tracy and Aurora at the same thing. Maybe we'll all go out to lunch. It's the first time we've seen each other in a long time, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of different ways. So I think the communication from the beginning, because again, this show is 2 weeks from now. I just got on yesterday to buy my ticket, and really probably didn't need to buy a ticket, but we have a booth on the show floor. So eventually I'll want to go to the show floor to see our booth, of course, and visit the other folks that are there. So I think just how things are communicated from the very beginning, and what is your intention? Is your intention to have everybody there? Then rethink the meal and what you're going to do and how you're going to say it and how you're going to advertise it.
Well, also, I think part of this is that we still have an analog mindset in a digital world, right? Like it's possible to collect information more, closer to the event through event apps. There are ways to collect different kind of information that can inform your decisions. Because I know the pushback that some planners might have is like, well, if registration's open for 6 months, that's a lot. That's a lot can change in 6 months, right? In terms of like who registers and like when are the numbers due, and it used to be that those numbers were due early for one reason. Now with supply chain, it's even more, right? Yeah. That those numbers need to come in early. But still being able to use digital technologies, whatever that looks like, finding a way to capture that data a little more real time and be able to make adjustments real time. I think that's challenging right now, but if the theme of this is rethinking requires breaking things and rebuilding them sometimes, and breaking things hurts. People don't like to change. And so it breaks some of those mindsets of, no, we can't do this because, like, well, let's break down each of the no's. If this is a no for a supply chain issue, what is the item we're ordering? Why is it a no? Is there a replacement? Is there a way to communicate and sell that? in a nice way, like Molly's saying, right? So I think it's just about breaking down those no's and looking at like, where is technology a solution? Where is it attitude? Where is it training? Where is it, there are different ways to solve. All of this is solvable, right? But we just tend to lump it all together into one big problem that's really seems insurmountable. But I think that's, again, breaking it down into smaller bits makes it more, it feels a little more approachable. Like in this event,
digestible.
This piece. Yeah, like let's solve the which tables to leave empty problem this event, and next event let's solve the other the next problem.
Right. Well, and it does take a lot of rethinking. And Molly, that cartoon that you were showing us before, the card that your dad sent you, of the cats, right? And read what the card says, because I can't.
It says, "Okay, who's thinking outside the box again?"
I mean, and that's so true, right? But that was pooping, but yeah.
Well, outside the cat box, right? Come on,
Right, exactly. But it is, and in Aurora, I mean, I love the idea of using using the app, which we got to get people to download the app, to ask them a question saying, hey, a week out, hey, what's your plans for lunch on this date, right? Because you could order more food trucks if more people are coming, or you could, I mean, that to me, that's an easy solution. Molly, back of the house, you might not be able to get the supply in to order if a whole bunch of extra people are coming. But I remember an event I did in Orlando, and we didn't think about the fact that that hotel only had 4 small restaurants, and they were not walking distance to any of the other big restaurants. Whereas the year before, or the 7 years prior to that, they were in Vegas. And so lunch on the exhibit floor got hounded. And this year, and my client's like, no, they're lying. They're lying. I'm like, why would they lie about having to go make a whole bunch of more food in the back of the house? To me, that's a whole bunch of F-bombs dropping, right? And scuttlebutt happening in the back to try to charge you more money. So I like breaking that box. That's a good concept. So Aurora, there's a question that you had prompted me before. I'm going to move you over here, Molly. There you go.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I feel so much better now.
You're not in the corner.
I was nervous about that. I didn't want to say nobody puts baby in the corner, but I didn't want to say it. So,
I'll put me in the corner. What role do supplier sales teams have in this? Because I think I get a big pushback from them, as well as CSMs and catering convention services managers.
Well, what you just said is a big part of the issue, right? Like if the planner or client is automatically thinking like they're up to no good, well, where does that start, right? So the salespeople, and I'm not saying that the salespeople create that dynamic, but the salespeople are the ones who could be positioned to change that dynamic. And I think that it's very important for the operators, the supplier side, to recognize how important it is to train salespeople. So here's the thing. Human nature is none of us wants to talk about something that we're not knowledgeable about, right? We all want to look smart. We all want to look good. We want to look professional. We want to look like we're on our game. And so if you ever talk to a salesperson, especially salespeople, because their job is to like sell things. So they want to be able to talk about the stuff that they know, the shiny objects that are really easy to sell. And then maybe they avoid some of the things that aren't so shiny about what they're selling. And so if we're expecting them to have conversations and consulting clients on food waste, we haven't given them any training. We haven't given them the language for this. We haven't given them the sales materials. I find in most of the places where I go to train, there's a lot of times there's already this built in like, oh yeah, we're sustainable because we do this and we do that. So first off is the opportunity to be more sustainable. But second off is, well, what are you telling your clients about that? Oh, we don't really, it would be cool if we had a one pager. Oh, it'd be neat if we had a couple of slides. Oh, I wish we had a page on our website. And so I think just arming the sales teams, and then in a different way, the client services people, because they are at a different phase of things. But it's really all about influence and psychology and knowledge, right? Like giving them the knowledge so that it doesn't seem like this vague, nebulous thing they need to know all things about. It could be like, look, we're going to train you on the top 5 best practices that have the best opportunity to reduce food waste or reduce, have other sustainability impacts. If you can speak intelligently to those 5 things, let's just start there. And that becomes a baseline. And you just, you know how it is. Once you start with sustainability, you just want to grow and know more. And I find that when you start training those people, they ask really smart questions. They, you're just giving them the little bit of nudge that they need. They'll usually like take off and figure out solutions you never even dreamed up, because this is their job. This is what they do. Right. And they want to solve problems. That's part of why they like being in those kinds of positions. So I think we just have to give them a little bit of a foundation and some of that terminology and how to combat some of the objections they're going to receive. And then I think from there, we're going to see a big change.
Well, and I think one of the stories that you told me, put me in the corner, was a salesperson that you recently met. And he's like, well, what do I know? And then you just asked him, well, do you have a donation partner, food donation partner? And he's like, wow, he needed to go back and ask.
He didn't know. Right. Like he was doubting the role his team it could play in food waste reduction. And so I just asked the question, well, let's start with, can you tell me about your hotel's donation program? And he had no answer, and he got it immediately. He was like, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Yep. We should probably know how to answer that question.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah, because to me, and I just got a client just sent me the proposal from one of the hotels, and it's in Seattle. And I mean, 2-3 pages were all about their sustainability practices. And I'm like, book this hotel now. Just because I've never seen that actually in an RFP answer.
That's great.
It was really well done. So, but it's a journey. And you mentioned, when we were chatting before, it's like, it's a journey doing this. It's little tiny steps. So Molly, do you have an example of a client that took this journey, like with Sodexo Live or the convention center, on how they saw the changes over the course of a couple of years or events?
Yeah, so we do have a client. I won't mention their name because I'm not really sure they'd be excited about me doing that. So I won't do that. But we do have a client that comes to us very regularly. They come every other year, and they have for quite a long time. And their company is another food company, and they're not very well. If you go into their stores, you may or may not see sustainability, front and center. Kind of depends on where you are in the world. If you go into some of their stores in other countries besides the US, then you certainly will see it a little bit more in the front. And so the answer was, we always do our annual conference in Orlando. And it's in the US, and the US doesn't really have a lot of great sustainable practices as a whole, right? That's how they view the US. And so, West Coast, maybe a little bit of West Coast, maybe, gets by, but the rest of it, not very good practices. And so, the building itself started stepping up their practices. They were going for LEED certification, gold LEED certified in one building, and going for just LEED certified in the other building. And so just slowly but surely, right, they used to just put out food like, from 11 to 4 was lunch, and their reasoning for that was that, we've got sessions, and they've got people they need to go talk to, and we've got things that they've got to do, and they've got a passport, and they've got to get around to each little area and visit these certain people. And then they still need to be able to eat, and we want them to be able to eat whenever they can. And then it was desserts comes out at the same time, and it goes till the show closes at 6. And, there was tons and tons of food. And it wasn't that people were really eating the food. It was just that they wanted everything to look full. They wanted it to be full until the very end. It wasn't like we could even, hey, we've got 6 of these stations. Can we just go down to 3? No, everything's got to be full till the end. And so that was, in the 90s. And then, we started having to charge them a little bit more money because, we were having to put more food out there. We were having more than what would normally be on the menu prices. And so, that got their attention a little bit. So they started cutting back just a hair. Okay, maybe lunch doesn't have to be 4 hours. Maybe lunch could be 2.5 hours, like most normal people, or 2 hours. And so, just making those small changes. And then it got to, we're going to guarantee per type of buffet. So they do 8 buffets. They do 2 of each type. So 4 concepts and 2 of each one. So 2 Asians, 2 Europeans, 2 Mexican, whatever that might be. We're going to do 2 of those, and we're going to order per station. And so they would change the way that we did the tastings. And so they were tasting food that was more bite size, more seeing the elements it was going to be served on, more seeing what the table was going to look like. In other words, you could fill it up with decor. They could fill it up with shrimp chips, right? That don't really cost anything, that look really pretty. People don't really eat. Some people do eat them, kind of depends on where you're from. But, they started recognizing that there was ways to still make it look the way they wanted it to look, and still, cut down on food and food waste.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from the buyers, from our side, from the operator side, you go, oh, no, there goes our budget, right? That's one of the first things that our higher ups go, hey, they're going to buy less. No. They're going to buy just the amount, the same, but they're going to buy what they really want. They're going to buy what they really want, and they're going to be able to focus on the items that they really want. And so we got really the menu piece down pretty good, the guarantees and the 70 to 65% of what they would use of their total to get their guarantees, taking a little bit more off of for breakfast because, if they had a party the night before somewhere, people aren't going to make breakfast in time. They really started thinking about their food service. I mean, we were trying to get them to think about it as well, but they really started going, oh, we already have the answers. They're right here in our registration. We already know. We know bus counts. We know from people on buses, we know how many are going to show up. We know how many routes we have and how many hotels we have. We know what's going to happen. We know how fast we're going to circle them, all that stuff. And then they started moving into the waste side. And so we want to try to compost in the front of the house. A lot of our venues do over in Europe. It's something that we feel like we could do. It's going to take a long time for the U.S. to kind of get used to it. And it did. So they tried it in a small section of the floor. In one seating area, we had a the triple bin, theory, the fill, the recycle, the compost. And then we have a composter here at the building anyway that does composting and has dedicated compactors on our dock. So taking that out, having a location for it to go to was already something we had the infrastructure to do. So once they realized it wasn't something they were going to have to actually come up with their own composter, figure out how to do it, sign a contract for the short time they were here, trying to make it work within a system that wasn't already working, they were like, wow, you already have it. Okay, great. Well, now we need to figure out how to get our guests to actually do it. And so this past time that they were here, they actually built a sustainability recycling hub on the show floor. And cool. They got with the decorator, which is one of the larger decorators that is used in the industry, and said, hey, can you build us one of these things? And they said, yeah, I guess, and weren't quite sure what it was. It ended up being kind of a long piece. It had a counter in front so that as our bussers were bussing the tables, they brought it over to the counter. All those folks that worked in there were volunteers from the show. They were, relatives of some of the folks that did registration. They were relatives of some of the folks that did transportation, the folks that got a free chance to come to Orlando. Right. So, I mean, who wouldn't do that? Even if you weren't going to make any money, you still got to go to the theme parks because they did, events, and you have to, be there and see their show. And so the trays would come and they had full separation. They had, a place for liquid dump, a place for food, a place, and all their packaging. They'd gone through all their packaging and everything was compostable. They did everything they could do. They even got a straw that was compostable, which was outside their spec, for what they serve across the rest of the world. And so, they put their work in behind the scenes to realize that everything that's going to go out is going to be compostable. The food, what they're eating it in, it's all going to be compostable. So, and then they use reusable trays, right? So our folks would bring it over to the table. It would get sorted correctly. And when you walked right behind the facade, talked about recycling and what recycling can do and how much recycling they've already done, and gave a lot of cool stats about, energy saved and this saved and carbon and just a lot of really cool stuff. So that waste piece was really brought home, and it made by the fourth day, because they're here for 4 days, by the second really day, folks knew that their waste was going over there, and they would get up and, follow the server, hey, I want to see where it's going. And come over.
That's cool.
Talk to the folks that were there, and the client had, ambassadors there that were there just to speak of what their efforts are across not only the U.S., across the rest of the globe, what they wanted to do here, why they're doing it here, what message they're trying to send to the rest of their attendees. And their attendees are going to take that back to their homes. And when they have their smaller regional meetings, hey, if it can happen at the big show, for 15,000 people, then there's no reason it can't happen for my 3,000 people here in the Midwest, for instance.
Right.
So it was
that is awesome.
Home. And so the other piece of it was that they looked at the food items. So they serve their own food, and then we supplement with our own food. And what we find is that they actually eat more of our food than they do theirs typically, because they eat theirs all the time. But the goal of it, why they do it, is so they can taste new menu items from across the world, across the country. Hey, they serve a different kind of burger in England. Here it is, give it a try. Well, what happens was those folks, they would come and just take a bite and throw it away, because they really didn't want whatever the item was. They just wanted to taste it and say they tried it. And then they were going to go to our buffets and get something totally different. And so they started talking for our buffets. They started looking into more local foods and more farmers, and how can we tell the story, and what kind of impact are we having on these folks when we buy 15,000 pieces of bread for 4 days in a row? What's that doing to that little company that, has 5 employees? Well, now that little company, because they've been here for so long, has 12 employees. They offer insurance, and they offer a 401k plan. And it's something that would never have happened had it not been for the show, had it not been for the way they changed their thinking, and it had not been for us continuing to use them in our regular everyday business. So you really can make a giant impact. It may be really slow, and it started really slow. It started with, hey, you don't need to feed people 5 hours. Let's just start.
Right.
Right? Let's just take a simple one and work our way back down. But you thought when we brought it up that we were trying to knock down a mountain, like that we were trying to do something that was just unheard of. You can't possibly do that. And we started doing it on desserts first, to be honest with you. Okay, well, let's just cut back a little bit on dessert and see what happens. It didn't change anything. And then we started doing some prepackaged, which I know from a waste perspective was not the best. But what it showed them is that people really didn't want a ton of dessert. You didn't really need to have a giant cake and serve big pieces of cake every time. You could have a smaller piece of something and still make it work. And we could do cakes in a smaller little compostable cup for them to be able to have a little compostable spoon sticking out of it. And then they could walk away and then be able to compost that. If they didn't eat it, it's okay. Everything was going to be compostable. So it's just the changing of the thinking and what you envision. Because a lot of people envision, I need to see tall cakes. I need to see a 12-inch cake standing up on the table, 15 layers of cream cheese and carrot cake. And it doesn't have to be like that, right? That's not what the purpose of the show is. That's maybe a purpose for a certain show. It may be a suite in a stadium or an arena. That's the thing. And they've ordered a giant cake and here it comes, it's somebody's birthday. But it doesn't have to be that way for a regular everyday event. I think that was just the changing of their thinking and the changing of the guard. So it was a grassroots campaign because above wasn't really going for it. And below didn't really know. So the middle is what made the difference. And the middle got the above to buy off on it and say, hey, the guests are not unhappy. They did post-show surveys, and everybody was happy. Everybody thought it was great. Everybody enjoyed the variety. They enjoyed not seeing the food sitting out there for 5 hours, believe it or not.
Well, and that's a whole nother thing. It's like, we don't need to graze for 5 hours, right? And my God, we already have an issue of, obesity in our society. So let's not push that too. But the three of us also saw a chef at Cater Source who used to work for the Georgia International
Galleria.
Cobb Galleria. And he has since left. But I mean, just what he did. I mean, Molly, the story of you, the small farmer that's now giving 401ks and whatever. I mean, he helped his farmers in Atlanta area do the same thing, and he saved his company. I don't remember how much money he said he saved. He's like, let me do this so we get out of this contract. Right. And it helped a lot.
It builds trust.
It does.
Right? It builds trust. If you take, and I think, a lot of what Molly was speaking to is about building the trust, but it's also about where can we remove risk? Right? Like dessert is probably the least risky thing you've got going on today. So let's start there. Right now, another, like at a wedding, that would be the opposite, right? Maybe dessert would be like the last place you'd want to go. So I would say start with looking at where there are changes behind the scenes that the client never even needs to know about, right? Like that's a good place to start because that builds your internal institutional knowledge and infrastructure to be able to then do things that are more client facing. And again, starting with the things that remove the risk from them, right? Like Molly said earlier, the food is here. We have the food for you. There's no risk that you're not going to get the food. Right. All we're asking is a slight adjustment in, the presets and how we get the food out. Right. And so it's the removing risk and building trust is a big part of this journey, especially when you're talking about food and beverage.
Right. Yeah, because one woman says, well, no, everybody that comes here, they just want to eat snacks and they want to, eat the bad food. I'm like, they really don't, because Molly, it's like you said, they don't really want all those desserts. Right. There's only so much sugar you can have. Right. And I think just statistics wise, looking at coming out of the pandemic, a lot more people are trying to be healthier.
Yeah.
And they don't want all that sugar or they don't want to graze all day long because that's what they've been doing for 2 years.
Right.
Well, and then kind of just bringing on, I was reading some stories this morning about the supply chain and the whole issue with some countries are now putting blocks on the food that they're exporting. Yeah. Right. And so we really do need to rely on those local providers. And granted, in Florida, you probably have an abundance of local providers that can feed the size of a convention center food, right? Whereas here in North Carolina, where I am, we probably don't have that many small farmers that could potentially do that. But I think we need to rethink of how where we're sourcing from. Too.
Well, and also if we're statistically wasting 30 to 40% of our food, then that means we're buying 30 to 40% more of ingredients we're taxing the supply chains to provide food that is going to end up in the garbage. So I think when we talk about the supply chain issues, not only should we have a buy local conversation, which I'm always a fan of that. I could talk about that all day, but I think we also need to have a portion conversation and a menu design conversation, right? Because especially when you're looking at like your higher end proteins or certain ingredients that people like one of the things that the chef that you were referring to mentioned is he was talking about blueberries and that it was a bad year for blueberries in Georgia. And so he was just trying to get blueberries off the menu because it was just, they're expensive, they're hard to find. But people, that's like oranges or bananas, like people expect them, right? Like there are certain things that people expect to have year round. And so it requires some flexibility, but it also requires maybe rethinking, can the blueberries maybe be a topping versus like the main piece of whatever it is, a pastry or a dessert. And same with like meat, the slices of protein, the portion sizes that we tend to see and expect are especially when we have multiple proteins available on like a buffet or action stations and such. It's when you add it all together, it's a little bit like who can eat that much? And especially if you depending on the service style, you can always say like, well, go back for more if you're still hungry, right? But you have to kind of offset that with like how many people didn't even finish the portion because it was just cut too large. Right. So I think that's another piece is just like looking at portions and overall menu design. And I think related to that, kind of going back earlier about an analog world, I find that so much of the information about portion sizes or how many pieces of bread should go on this table or what size bowl are we using here and there, it's all in like someone's mind. A lot of that stuff is not documented. And so it's hard for us to be able to like then take waste data and compare it to these other data points, right? And then that can get complicated. So I'm not suggesting that we drown ourselves in data, but when it's not written down somewhere, when we can't really get access to like factual data, accurate data, then we're just relying on like, right. And so I think that's another thing that we have to rethink in light of the supply chain issues that we're facing.
Well, and it reminds me, I keep changing all of our views here because I'm just having fun. It reminds me of an event I did last December, and my client said her client does not like to see the bottom of a bowl, right? And he's got a lot of money and he doesn't care. And so she's like, if 2 scoops come out and you can see the bottom of the bowl, then we got to replace it. And I'm like, and of course I've come on site and I didn't know any of this until I come on site. And so how do I, in a COVID environment too, how do I say, chef, I need smaller, to me, it's like put out smaller bowls. So you're really not using as much out front, right? But rethinking that whole process so that it is, how are we serving it? What are we doing it so that it's not wasting so much food front of the house? Because, at that point I didn't even know anything about composting from that. Right. So, but it's kind of just breaking it up and rethinking it. How can I still serve to the level that you want, but without wasting all of the food? Yeah.
Well, and that goes also back to the original conversation around the sales piece, right? Like if you've got a client like that, it's hard to push back, right? Like this is the way I want it. I've got the money. I don't care. I don't want to have a conversation. And there are a lot of clients like that, right? Depending on maybe the type of clientele you serve. And in fact, I was recently surveying as part of a project I'm doing some venues and hotels about like the sales teams and where food waste comes into play. And we even broke it down into sort of it depends based on, is it a corporate group, a private, personal group, like a wedding or a party? Because you're going to have probably different kinds of conversations. And there's even cultural elements, right? Like one group they deal with a lot of weddings and a lot of different cultures. And they're like, how do we have this conversation when the cultural norm is just food, So it's not as simple as like push back. It's still a relationship driven thing, which is what sales is, right? Sales should be a relationship driven process, not just transactional or sort of order taking, right?
Right.
So I do have something to add on that. So it kind of depends on the venue you're in, right? And the size of the group that you're bringing. But some of the ways that we've addressed it without being able to address it on the sales end, or the salesperson said that they tried and it just didn't go over well, and the client didn't really want to talk about that. They want to talk about other stuff. At the tasting opportunity is when you can take that opportunity and go, okay, well, they wanted me to make a bunch of all these items, like let's say there's 6 of their main protein items, right? So then you make half pans of each one and you go, I can make it this way, which is how the menu states, or I could make it this way, which, and then you have the chef is there on site to explain what that means if they make it a different way. And so some of it, hearing it directly, it doesn't matter what I say as a former banquet director or as a CSM or as the salesperson, when the chef is standing there and saying, this is what it's going to do. And the first thing that the client thinks is, that's going to cost me more money. No, actually it's not going to cost you any more money. I'm still going to make the same amount of food, but we're going to be able to save it at the end easier. I'm going to put it in smaller portions. I'm going to put it in smaller half pans. I'll put it to the side. We're talking about doing these deliberate donations now, which is thinking about food donations prior to an event. Because again, like I said earlier, you've paid for the food. That is part of the contract. You've paid for the food. We're not going to short you on the food. Please hear me loud and clear. If there are folks that are out there shorting you on food, then they clearly have alternative motives, right? So, and you need to be really clear on that prior to making an assumption or making an accusation, because 9 times out of 10 the food is there. It just may not be right where you can see it. Even if you walk in the back of the house, go show me the hot boxes, and you count it all up, there's still a hot box in the kitchen that is waiting to pull that last bit of food out and put it in the hot box.
And just to clarify for anyone in your audience that may not know why we're hammering this point so much, if the food goes out, and it's not eaten, the only destination for it is compost or landfill. If it doesn't go out, it can be donated, and it can feed either staff or local families. So that's the big reason why we are really dwelling on this point of having the food but not serving it, because that changes the destination of the food and the impact of that food.
Right. There are. Yeah. And it's a good clarification. So thank you. So yeah, when I say there's still food there, there's still food there. It's just that, we had 35 buffets open. So as an intelligent and labor conscious, manager, I'm going to close as buffets as I possibly can and get all the way down to the center, when there's time to be able to do it. I'm not closing while there's got 20 people in line, but I'm going to close as we keep moving. And as I go back to the back and the chef says, hey, I'm down to 2 pans, I'm down to 3 pans, I'm down to 1 pan, depending on what it might be, what the item might be. So we're trying to get ahead of that and go ahead and put that stuff in like aluminum foil pans before it actually gets in the oven even. So when it comes out of the oven and we put it in a special hot box, and we continue to temp that throughout the time frame in which we are required to do by HACCP procedures, which are hazard analysis critical control point, is what that stands for. That's a certain time frame in which the food has been cooked to where it can be served. And so that's a 4-hour window. And so, if we haven't served it, we are able to take it back upstairs and blast chill it, and then put it in a cooler and call some of our local folks that have transportation of their own to be able to come pick it up when it's convenient for them. So we're not at midnight trying to change pans over into to-go pans. We're not trying to call somebody and get them out there at midnight. We're deliberate donating as kind of thinking about it on the front end. And so one of the clients I thought would be so excited about it was not as excited, which is the same client I was talking about earlier that did the compostable and recycling center on the show floor. They were not excited about it. But I have another client coming in September who couldn't be more excited about it. And so it's like, go for it. We're all in. We're all in. We want to know if you're able to donate. We want to know how much you're donating, because we can think about that for next year. She's the one that wants to pull the bacon out of her little omelet thing, so that she can have just a little bit of bacon on the side if somebody wants it. Covers certainly religious issues, other kind of issues. And then if people really wanted the bacon, it's a smaller bowl of bacon. And so she had them do that for the tasting, and I think our guys were really kind of didn't understand it. So there was a giant bowl of bacon, like a bigger bowl of bacon than we would have ever even put in the omelets that we were serving, like way more bacon. And so again, it's a learning curve for us on the backside as well, because when she says pull the bacon out, to us it's like, oh, they want more bacon. You know what I mean? They need more bacon. It's not enough bacon that's in there. And if we put too much in there, it'll taste bad. But then people can add their own bacon on top.
Because heaven forbid nothing served with bacon.
Right. So it's a learning curve on both sides, though. Because that was the client's idea. Hey, I'm gonna hold the bacon out, and I'm holding the bacon out for a reason. I've got religious issues with some of the folks. I've got other concerns. Pull the bacon out. So we gave her this giant bowl of bacon, which is not what she wanted. She wanted like a little display cup of bacon, right? So again, it's a little bit of, and she told that we had a meeting that same day and I didn't even see the breakfast, right? I wasn't even there. She was doing a sustainability meeting, came in to meet with her. And she said, this is what we're thinking about doing. And she told me what had happened at the breakfast. And I was like, well, did you mention that to the salesperson as to why you were doing it? She goes, I did. Like, okay, well, when you received your BEO, did you see anything on the BEO that denoted to the culinary team that is what the purpose was? And she said, well, I didn't look. And I said, well, I'm not saying that you should look and that's your responsibility. Mm-hmm. However, that's how the communication works. Because those that are in our world know that if it's not on a banquet event order, which we call a BEO or an SEO, service event order, an EO, whatever you want to call it, EO is at the end of it. So it's either banquet event order, service event, something. If it's not on there, that's the contract. That's what you've signed in that contract. So the chef is going to follow that, period. And so it's about communication. So she told the salesperson didn't know what to do with that and just put it on the BEO as a bowl of bacon. Well, it was 50 people. So they put a bowl of bacon on there for 50 people.
And again, if there's more training for salespeople to be conscientious of food waste and understand some of the possibilities, they're gonna instantly be like, oh, I see what's going on here. Right. And maybe even be able to be consultative and say like, well, what would you think if we did it like this or like that versus like bowl of bacon? Right. We want the sales team to be able to give the clients more interesting options so that sustainability feels like you're adding to versus taking from what you're doing.
Well, and I think we also need to clarify, because you clarified, I like the BEO, what that means, because some people might not. It changes it whether you're a convention center or a hotel and who's managing culinary at the convention center, but also the salesperson. So a salesperson at a hotel is really not going to get into the nitty gritty of how this is served, but a catering salesperson at a convention center that works for Sodexo, for example, is that person. Right. And so it is definitely a different, you have to figure out your culinary or your catering in a hotel. It's the CSM, which is probably the convention services manager. And that's that person. So you have to make sure that you're talking to the right people, but your hotel salespeople should know how to sell the sustainability aspect of your event
or at least plant the seed, at least.
Right. Exactly.
Like it's, you talked about early, like using the word journey. I would also say like, it's a little bit of a baton race, right? The salesperson's going to start off and you want a nice handoff to culinary, to the client services team, so that there's, like this seed planted and culture of this is stuff we talk about here.
Right.
And I think,
all right.
Yeah. And so go ahead, Tracy. No, from a chef's perspective, like I think about it. So we talk about composting, right? We talk about trying to save our trim waste and collecting things in the kitchen during the preparation time of food. And so I was complaining to one of our senior chefs about that. And I said, they've got to start recognizing that they are generating food waste at their station and not just one trash can. And she goes, oh, no, Molly. No. We were taught that in culinary school 30 years ago. When I went to culinary school. We were taught that. We had the 3 bins on top of the table. We had 3 bins, this, and this. And I go, okay, cool. What was the bin for the food waste for? What was for food waste? Okay, cool. Was it for composting? And then she got really quiet. What was it for? It was to teach us about food cost. Oh, about food cost. Oh, okay. I got it. Well, that makes all the sense in the world then, doesn't it? I mean, so don't tell me 30 years ago they were teaching you about compost. They weren't. They were teaching you about food cost, which as a chef is super important. So when you had a bucket left of crab claws, of crab meat, that because you weren't good enough about peeling your crab claws, they added that up and said, here's what you just cost yourself for the evening. You're going to need to now raise the price on those crab specials that you do because you don't know how to clean your crab correctly. And so it wasn't about the food waste and where it was going. It was about the cost of what they just threw away.
Oh my God, that's so huge. Yeah.
So the thinking of it is so because from a salesperson, right? Let's say I'm a salesperson and this lady told me she just wanted a bowl of bacon. And let's say she explained to me why she wanted the bowl of bacon. I wanted to pull it out. Not that many people need to eat the bacon. There's a lot of people that don't eat bacon. I don't want to offend anybody. I'll still have the bacon there if they want it, but it's really just for what would have gone in the little bitty omelets, the little individual omelets you're going to make. So if the salesperson went up to the kitchen or found the chef and said, here's why I'm putting a bowl of bacon on here. She doesn't want a bowl of bacon for the 50 people. It's not about that. It's about how much bacon would you have put in those little omelets. And the chef may go, Molly, it's not going to be a lot. It may not even be, it may not even fill this cup. I go, well, then that's what you put out there. And if they need more bacon, then we address that with her at the time. But that's what you do. What would you have done? If you need to chop the bacon up and put it there, just don't put it in the egg mix and then drop it in the bowl. Because I guarantee you it's less than the giant bowl that you just served her. And she's the one that's wanting to save food cost and save on food waste. And there you've gone against what you said you were taught, which is that food cost. And so it was a revelation to me too, Tracy, because when I looked at her, she was very argumentative, almost back at me. Like, oh no, we were taught that in culinary school. You don't understand. Okay, cool. Well, then walk me through it. We had the 3 bins, blah, 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 blah. And I waited till she finished talking, and she, the chef, that's what chefs do. And they're done talking. And so when she got done, I said, okay, well, was that for composting? Was that for food waste, to reduce your food waste? And like dead silent. Because I knew it wasn't, but I wanted her to have to say it. And she said it was about food cost.
And that's huge.
So that's right there.
It's we've always done it this way mentality. That's why rethink is the theme of what we've been talking about, right? Because if you're on autopilot and it's just the way you've always done it, then and especially in the kitchen environment and the way culinary schools are run, it's a little bit militaristic, right? In terms of there's a hierarchy, that's why kitchen is run efficiently. Well, and it creates an efficient environment, right? But it also creates an environment where it's sometimes, and not across the board, but it can be sometimes, like we don't, this is the way we do it. Or like when you talk to a line cook or a sous chef, it's like, well, why do you do this way? Because chef likes it this way. And sometimes it's like it's almost like it's a policy, almost like this is my job description, only because one dominant personality has sort of said, this is how we do things.
Right. Exactly.
And so again, it's rethinking that.
Right. So, and thinking about, because we use the word yes, and in the description of this session and doing it, but Molly, with you talking to her, it's like, yes. And you learned that.
Yes.
And yes. So just saying, and yes,
Well, now she gets it. Now she's like, because we're about to roll out some food waste, practices, and now because I need them to buy in. I can try to roll out as many programs as I want to, but if the chefs are going to just go, don't listen to her. Here's what we really do. So I'm making them, be a part of it, and now they're super excited about it. We've got our own little green team going, and which we kind of had before, but now we've got real players that are actually influencing what's happening down in the field. And so they're even going through menus and looking at menus at all of our properties across the country, and all types, retail menus and catering menus and subcontractor menus, and finding out where the waste is from the menu, and then working their way backwards. And so they want to, now that they see that that's a new way for them to get it across about food cost, right? Because it's still ultimately in their mind about food cost, but to get it across their mind and use waste as the other piece of it is just been, it's like turning on a light bulb. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So Molly, one of the questions that you wanted me to ask you, because this is hysterical, is what did you think you were going to do with your career before you fell, or quote unquote got trapped into this whole food and beverage industry?
Well,
and Aurora, I want to know the answer to yours.
So I wanted to be an architect. I thought architecture was cool, right? I thought designing houses was cool. My dad was an engineer for defense, but an engineer, so he graph paper and slide rules and like all that stuff was like tools of his trade, right? And I just thought that was the coolest stuff that he was able to do, and draw something and then be able to see it come out in fruition and go, hey, you just drew that on a piece of paper and they actually made that thing. Like, that is the coolest thing ever. And so I always thought that's something I wanted to do. And then I tell people that, when you're in that, you get out of high school and you have that career fair, right? Or, whatever it is, right? And you go into a gymnasium and there's all these lines of, tables with people behind them, right? And so I saw these tables and everybody in line seemed kind of bored. And then there was this table with a really long line. Everybody was drinking and smoking and there was music playing. I thought, you know what? That's the line. I'm going to go get in that line. That's got to be the architecture line. That's got to be it. So you get in that line, and what you don't realize is that, they let you in freely. Come on in. We're happy to have you. And then there's a giant door that slams behind you. You're never going to get out. And you go, but I want to do something else. Too bad you're in food, because the more you write your resume and the more you try to hide it in your resume, it doesn't matter. They go, so you really serve food is what you, well, yeah, but I do all these other things. And so I wanted to be an architect is what I wanted to be. And so
Well, I think you are.
That is crazy because that's what I wanted to be when I was in high school. That is insane. That is so crazy because I ended up thinking like, well, maybe I'll be an interior designer instead. Never mind that I have no eye or talent for art and drawing, design, painting. I don't know what I was thinking. And that didn't last even my freshman year. And I quickly found my path, which is business. And I'm fantastic at that. But I've reinvented myself multiple times. I've worked in 5 different industries. I've worked in retail, software development, financial services, higher education, and hospitality. And I feel like this is my lane. Even during the pandemic, I was like, all right, I guess I'm done with hospitality. I should pivot out of hospitality. And the industry was like, no.
They don't let you out.
They don't.
You're right, Molly. The door closed behind me. But it's great. I love it, love it, love it, love it. But I've lived and I've worked many different roles. I've had a very varied career and I've loved it all. And it's all led me to where I'm at right now, which is in my lane and loving what I do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and Molly, I did want to too. I even tried to get into the NC State Design School to be an architect, and they didn't like my stick figure drawings and whatever. So they said, "See you." So now I do. Then I became an event planner.
It's funny because in my director of banquet world, I would take a show floor map and I would draw where everything was going to go. Draw where my buffets are going to go. Draw get approvals. Get it drawn on the decorators diagrams. So I ended up still getting to do that. Drawing out even a buffet and where the shapers are going, what utensils you need. I still ended up getting to do it. In fact, I've still got all my little,
That's a really cool thought process around it because it is. You
still get to do it.
Yeah. And I think you also architect, I'm verbalizing that word, the sustainability process, right? Absolutely. And I think that's really cool too. So, all right. So my gosh, ladies, we're at an hour that we've been chatting. So I love it. The 3 of us could talk about this for days on end, and we do. So one final question that I want to ask before we leave both of you is, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive dining experience mean or look like to you?
Lauren, I'll go first. Let Aurora get the last one because she'll just take whatever I say and make it sound better.
Exactly.
Because that's what she always does. So to me, safe and sustainable has changed since the pandemic, right? So safe before just, meant that you made it in the building, right? And you were okay. Or you made it to your seat and you were okay. Safe now is different.